Hey Eric, how's it going?
It's going all right.
Good
How are
deal,
you?
good. I'm good, man. Things are good. I'm glad that we have finally carved out some time to sit down and have this conversation and discussion. We kind of touched base in Boston. We're like started talking about CRT and the whole hubbub,
Yeah,
uh, and then we decided like, hey, we need to really kind of sit down and have this conversation. So I'm glad we are. And the points that we're going to hit are the current critical race theory conversation. The whole conversation is a red herring conversation. And what strikes me interesting about that particular is I saw a while back this was one of your tweets, and this was one of my thoughts as well. So we've seen this and wanted to do this for a while. And then also the current conversations around CRT, critical race theory, they're not even being had in an honest and earnest way. And then I would like us to talk about obviously empowered humanity theory and how the ideas that we're putting together and promoting are actually designed to stop and prevent acts of racism, bigotry, and injustice, essentially.
right.
So I'm glad we have this time. So when we say critical race theory is a red herring conversation, what does that mean to you?
Well, people are focusing on what's being called, or not. Actually, let me restart that. They're focusing on the labels and not what's happening, right,
Mm,
in the schools. Um, at first, it was that's not CRT, right? And then it became, oh, CRT is teaching history,
mm-hmm.
and that people are upset about. So they're saying it's not in schools, then they're saying it is in schools, but it's something that it actually isn't. That sounds very confusing, and I think that's the point. The point is to confuse people, throw them off, right, so that they can further, get away with what they're doing, and that is, a very tragic mindset coming from me right now. The less tragic mindset being, the idea that people are just misguided. They don't really know what's going on. They've been told misinformation, right? Not disinformation, but misinformation, which is just flawed, mistaken understandings of what's going on. The This is how, for example, CRT is kind of a red herring. The people who say it's just teaching accurate history, you know, um, that well, first of all, there's already a term for teaching accurate history. It's called teaching accurate history.
Yes. Yeah.
The fact that you need a new label suggests that there's more to it than teaching accurate history. I am not a big fan of CRT's manifestations in education, but in about 3 hours, I'm going to go into a class and teach accurate history about race,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yep.
I did several other times this semester. I
Yep.
don't need CRT or CRT derived pedagogy to do those things. It's not just teaching accurate history. That
Right. I
is a red herring argument to throw people off.
see. I want to kind of reiterate and talk about a little of my lived experience, so to speak, with that. Sorry for the jab there. So I was a history teacher for 10 years, and back in the early 2000s, and every opportunity I could teach about human atrocities and the shortcomings of the ideas laid forth in the founding documents of this country, I did. The idea is to learn from those mistakes, so we honor those that came before us, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and learn learn to not repeat those mistakes. And I didn't need CRT uh, to tell me how to do that, to tell me how to try to be a decent human and to prevent future atrocities.
Right. And that you say you're talking about past and future here. Let's talk about the present. We can talk about accurate situations going on in the present moment without devolving into what we're seeing in education these days, which is a essentializing of race, separating people into oppressor or oppressed, um, exaggerating the idea of systemic racism to the point where Beverly D'Angelo's line that is the question isn't whether racism happened, but how it manifested in that situation is being taken seriously, right?
Robin.
Sorry, yeah, Robin D'Angelo. Yes, yes,
Beverly's the better one.
yes. Did I say Beverly D'Angelo?
Yeah.
Oh, Sparky.
Hey, I'm glad that your brain refuses to recognize that person.
Oh my
You're
God.
you're doing something right, sir.
No, I'm exhausted. That's what I'm doing. I'm sorry if Beverly D'Angelo ever gets to, gets hold of this. I apologize to you. You are a national treasure.
Yes, you are, and we do not mean to conflate you with somebody that is. So she is clearly also speaking of Robin. Her work explicitly states that this movement is a rejection of liberalism. So kind of that's the real conversation to be had. Kind of is, do we still believe in liberalism, and which is the idea that the individual is the moral worth of society, not the idea that the individual is the problem. Whereas D'Angelo and Kendi, the state, basically what's happening in K-12, and pop culture, the current dominant heterodox culture, or orthodox culture, excuse me, the mainstream culture is one that is pushing forth the idea that the individual is the problem with society.
Yes,
Whereas what you and I are talking about, and through free black thought, through empowered pathways, through every vehicle that we can, is this idea of empowered humanity theory, and how we believe that the moral worth of the individual, that is important, that the idea of free will and somebody pursuing their own happiness and well-being as long as they don't hurt others is important. And we notice that there is nothing to address the faults of the individual, because as humans we have faults and we are prone to primitive and destructive ways of doing and ways of knowing. But what we have come up with is a way to fortify and strengthen the individual, and that's something that we'll get into later in this conversation. But just kind of calling out, what the conversation to be had is, not this ping pong back and forth about CRT is being taught, it's not being taught. um, there are bigger and grander things.
exactly. And this idea, what we're doing, right? We're not just emphasizing individuality to the neglect of communality, right? We're basically saying, the individual is the primary unit that needs to be addressed so that we can be better at communality, and working together towards a better future, right? So we're not ignoring the idea of working as groups. We're trying to enhance, the efficacy of group work by initially, looking at the individual and cultivating self-awareness and self-management in one another.
Individuals build systems,
Yeah,
and that's another distinction between, kind of what Wesley Yang and we're referring to as the successor ideology, is it is just built on this constant state of destruction and not any building. And we're talking about building. And we believe that you begin building with each individual within their heart and mind, and
yeah,
thinking about neuroplasticity, just the mere fact that we become what we practice,
right.
whether we want to realize that or not. On a pure basis individual level, we all become what we practice. And what we are encouraging the practice of, are dignity. And, we break that down into really seeing the commonalities beneath our biologies and understanding that we're all prone to the same motivations and capacities, desires, and we do seek to be together united and to practice that mindset, to practice not reacting in judgmental ways towards each other because of previous wiring.
Right. And and in order to practice that sufficiently, we have to be among others enough.
Yep.
There's there's an online there's a website based on gaming theory called The Evolution of Trust, if I'm not mistaken. And it just takes you through all these games. It's very interactive. The conclusion is that we can rebuild trust three ways, right? The first way is by repeated interaction, right? The more separate we are, the less able we are to see others for who they are and have them see us and understand us, and vice versa. So, consistent repeated interaction can help build trust, as does low miscommunication, which is what I'm all about. I'm a rhetoric professor. So doing our best to be as clear and concise as possible about our messaging, as well as being active listeners for other people's messages, right? So that kind of and that necessitates understanding and giving yourself to your audience and your surroundings and things like that. The last issue is a we attitude, a win-win attitude versus a us them attitude, or a win-lose attitude. And in order to have a win-win attitude, you kind of have to expand your concept of we to incorporate the people who you saw as the capital O other initially. So all these things necessitate an appreciation for communality. So we're not, we're talking about, we're bringing back, we're making individualism sexy again,
There
right?
you go.
For the purposes of societal well-being. I'm teaching King's Letter from Birmingham Jail later on today,
Okay.
and he has this to say about individuality and groups. He says, this is towards the end. This is the end of one of his paragraphs. I won't get into the entire paragraph. I'll just read this. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, right? So if they're making mistakes as individuals, they can figure that out, right? But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. So if we can work on the individual and several individuals to make sure that they don't become one of these groups that King is warning us about, the ones that kind of devolve into groupthink and hatred of the other, xenophobia and things like that. We need to focus on the individual, right? As a necessary first step.
Yep. So as you were talking, I realized that the ideology and the culture and now even the politics is getting to the point to where it is destroying trust. There is no collective societal trust of relationships. I've seen this ideology crush relationships, family relationships, working relationships. And that's one of the things that since it's designed to dissolve the individual, one of the best ways to do that is to disconnect them from each other, right? So it deeply bothers me that this movement is designed, one of the intentions is to divide and to cause a mistrust of others. So I spent 2014 through 2021 being a social and emotional learning specialist and really studying human emotions, trying to get to the root of behaviors and why do we do the things we do, even on a historically repeating pattern. That's what was always interesting is why do we somehow as a species keep repeating some of the same mistakes, especially considering where we are now, and the potential long-term generations effect that we're in charge of right now. And then also with that, I was part of the, equity and inclusion movement, and went to the workshops and I've really studied the critical social justice as a problem solving toolkit. And I found out that it's just a constant state of destruction. There is nothing out of that movement, out of the mainstream movement, that is designed to increase well-being, which is a word that I heard you use and something that's important to you. So I think that's one thing that unites us is we're noticing that, this is having a negative impact on our well-being, and ultimately it's designed to break the human spirit. And if there was a mass awareness of right now is the attack is on the human spirit, then I feel like maybe we could be a little bit more unified in how we're treating each other and where our decisions are coming from. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I do know what you're saying. I know what you're saying so well that I have nothing to add to that. That's good stuff.
Thanks, man. That's what drives. That's one of the things that drives us. You and I, and I know there's a lot of others out there as well. But kind of, if we could we did kind of jump into the deep end of the pool there for a minute. But that's what we mean by CRT is a red herring conversation. Like, there are echo chambers of people on opposite ends of the spectrum, and they're yelling at each other. They're passionate about what is happening, but I don't even know, like I said, if they understand really what's happening. What I know about what is CRT and is CRT being in education, is it in our schools, yada, 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 is that at least since 2016, a dominant feature of educator professional development, education and development at the university levels has been around CRT and CRT practices, and the overall lens. So thinking of going back to neuroplasticity, since our brains are wired to accept and adapt to the culture that's placed on us, this lens of critical theory, and I'll just leave it at critical. Let's just leave it at critical theory right now. This lens of critical theory as a problem-solving mechanism has been placed on basically everybody that is leading education, that is working with students. So it is a lens, it is a worldview. So teachers are presenting all content and interacting with students on a way based off of their lens. Now, to really simplify that lens is you either view your students as oppressors or you view your students as oppressed. And the way that you interact with those students is determined by how you view that person, rather than how can I, as the educator in the room, how can I increase the human potential of all of these individual students? So there is that lens, and I am very familiar with that lens, because once I noticed that that lens is placed on the entire system and started asking questions, I was called all the bad words. That's when for the first time in my life, I became a white supremacist, which I know that you too, sir, are a white supremacist. And
Right.
that is something that we struggle with together. We don't struggle with it, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing. But
We struggle
knowing,
with the people calling us white.
yes, well,
Yeah.
and my struggle with those people is I wish that we could sit down and have a discussion, so that we could say, we don't believe in your worldview. We don't believe that the best way to a perfect society is to engage in a constant state of nihilistic cynicism and destruction.
Yeah, well, they don't want to have that conversation because, they know that, a lot of what they're saying won't hold up to scrutiny. But B, having a conversation with us would be dignifying the bad guy with a response. And
Right.
they don't want to do that either. So the necessary conversation that has to be had isn't being had.
Isn't being had. And so, just to be clear, we are always open to having this discussion, with D'Angelo, either one of them, and Kendi, whoever wants to sit down and actually discuss. The issue here is these two different worldviews, and we don't have to break it down now, but it is on the empoweredpathways.org website. It's just the two different worldviews, and which worldview do A, we want to live by, and then B, more importantly, which worldview do we want to teach children so that they can create their worlds? That's what the conversation to be had is which worldview, as a K-12 system, which worldview do we want to teach now as a way to solve our issues now, and one that will ultimately liberate humanity? That's the task at hand.
That is the task at hand. And, I'm reminded with you talking, that, I've been accused of, creating a false dichotomy, between, uh, classical liberals and this successor ideology and things like that. Obviously, I agree that people are nuanced and
Mm-hmm.
everybody can, have aspects of both to some
Right.
degree, but
Yeah, of
ultimately
course.
they cancel each other out. So the dichotomy is legitimate in that sense, right?
Yeah.
And somebody can't be, against the idea of the scientific method and for it,
Right.
simultaneously.
Right.
Although people do talk that way, which is why they don't have conversations because it's obvious that they're not making any sense.
Right.
But yeah, just the viscera pieces of the Venn diagram of successor ideology and classical liberalism may be there, but it's this thin.
It's that thin.
You
Yeah.
know, it's
You
that.
know, there's aspects of postmodernism that I find interesting, uh, and
Yeah,
it's interesting. But ultimately, truth, beauty, and goodness, and pursuing those things, I feel more connected to other people, and I feel more connected to God, rather than just the deconstructing and seeing the world through a lens of the problem is always there, it's prevalent, the problem is the air we breathe, it's our history. And anytime you try to approach logic and reason as ways to fix that issue, you're halted, because logic and reason, like the scientific method, are white supremacy
right,
in
right.
this day and age. Now, which is interesting, because that's the same tactic that Trotsky used in 1927. was calling those that spoke out against communism, deemed them racist. So one thing I've learned from all of my DEI trainings is that essentially everything associated with truth, beauty, and goodness, individualism, meritocracy, believing that we're all created equal, Judeo-Christian, all of those things are now white supremacy and whiteness. So that's kind of another conversation to be had is it, or is this just a way to destroy the ideas that have led to human liberation?
Well, if the definitions of truth, beauty, and goodness are not the definitions of those things in your particular culture, that I can see how people would have issues with that, especially if the hegemonic understanding of those terms, isn't, or is diametrically opposed to your culture. But wouldn't a great conversation be, let's get together and talk about what truth is and can be, what beauty is and can be, what goodness is and can be,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
In the multicultural context of the United States of America,
Yep.
right? The thing about breaking down, you know, um, narratives, breaking down definitions of those things, deconstructing them, right, is that
Mm-hmm.
nature abhors a void.
Yep.
You can deconstruct something, but you can't just leave it deconstructed. Something else has to be there, right?
Yep.
Because the concept of beauty is still an aspect of your life, even if it isn't the same as that other person's concept of beauty. What we can do then is be pragmatic about this, and I've argued before that a lot of definitely contemporary anti-racist ideologies lack sufficient pragmatism, right? And this stuff without pragmatism is just going to lead to more problems. But we can be pragmatic about what, in an American context, is beauty, is goodness, and ultimately is truth. And
Yeah.
I will be a robust and interesting conversation. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. Unfortunately, the people who need to have it the most refuse.
Man, that's incredible. You know, maybe we can those would be interesting conversations, and I would like to find a way to facilitate spaces for those to take place sometime.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
it's now that I think about it, now we're having all of these. This is a needed conversation. This is a needed conversation. This is a needed conversation. It appears that not only is CRT a red herring conversation, but it is blocking the dam of much needed conversations.
Yes.
And that if we, essentially the people in charge right now, if the adults in the room, there's a lot of really important conversations that we need to have, and hopefully we can use elements of relational trust to have some of those much needed conversations. It's time now, I believe, that working groups, families, stop viewing each other as others. If the ideology has done those damages, I believe that it is time. That's something else that we're working towards doing is repairing harm that's been caused, because it's what it's designed to do.
Right.
So I feel that over the course of this next year and beyond, we're going to be doing some really interesting things.
I agree.
Um, what else would you like to add? What else should we add? Did we miss? What did we miss?
Um, I believe Robert Pondicio is his name. Wrote an article a few weeks ago about how social and emotional learning in any capacity shouldn't be in the schools, mainly because the teachers aren't trained to do it.
Mm,
I think a response to that is inherent in what we're doing with empowered pathways. And first of all, as you've mentioned several times, a lot of what's going on in student failure is an issue of emotional intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
not just or not only IQ, right? Um, I mean, there are people with high IQs who have low EQ and therefore aren't going to be as productive as they can. I know that firsthand, being a professor in the field of rhetoric and composition, which is a field that is high IQ, low EQ.
Mm.
Sure, right? So something has to happen there. But with the issue of people not being adequately trained to do this, this is, and I guess this is our take on this, and maybe not everybody else's. This is a rhetorical endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Empowerment is a rhetorical endeavor. With the individual or intrapersonal, as it's called in empowerment theory, how are we talking to ourselves?
Yep.
When something happens, what conversation are we having with ourselves to create the belief about that action, which then in turn causes a consequence,
Yep.
right? The interactional, the communal, obviously rhetorical. How do we understand the people I'm talking to in order to identify with them, in order to best convey our message to them, and vice versa? That is a rhetorical endeavor. And the behavioral, coming together, collaborating, and things like that takes a lot of what's called in social linguistics perlocutionary force. How do I, say this word as a speech act to get things done, and how do I work with other people in ways that we can bond sufficiently, not love each other and things like that. I mean, that's nice, but that's not what I'm talking about here. To sufficiently bond and get things done. These are all rhetorical endeavors. Therefore, they are in our wheelhouse.
Yep.
We don't
Yep.
have to be a psychiatrist to do this.
And to build on that, the ways in which we can do what you just said is through the tenets of empowered humanity theory.
Yes.
We see each other through that lens of dignity. When
Mhm.
I interact with people in the world, I have a deep understanding that this person is just like me. I'm not going to do this person harm,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to do other people harm as well, because I know that whatever our differences are, they want to avoid, they too want to avoid suffering, and they too will alleviate the suffering of others when they encounter it, no matter how much of a lack of respect I may have for somebody for their behaviors.
Mhm.
If I honor that dignity, I'm not going to do any harm to myself, because when we harm others, we harm ourselves, but I'm not going to harm that other person. So if that's the lens in which we view each other, rather than which intersectional group are you, where are you at on the oppressed matrix? Because if you look at that thing enough, you'll realize that every single person is an oppressor in some fashion, some way or others. So if we're really going to begin entangling with this idea, just know that every single person is an oppressor, and this thing is, we're entering a period of time of, do we teach the future this is what we do, or that dignity lens? And then also, where you talked about it's interpersonal, how do we recognize those thoughts of fear and judgment? Because that's typically, as a human being, our first reaction in almost everything that we do, everyone we encounter, is one of fear and judgment.
Mhm.
And how and when can we disrupt and inspect those moments and replace that with inquiry and compassion?
Right.
That too can help build or tear down some of those walls that have been built, because neurologically we've been wired to separate ourselves from each other and to view each other in the most horrific ways. No matter what intersectional group you're a part of, you are looked upon in the most unpleasant ways. And we're asked to see each other in the most unpleasant ways. So this is how we're wiring ourselves. And this is how we are putting this on children at this point.
Right.
So a lot of the passion behind maybe the anti-CRT movement may come from a place where our urgency is coming from, but the traditional, I guess, pro-CRT movement is really interested in addressing human atrocities. But the point is, if those things, if human well-being is important to you, if the ability for us to get along with each other in this moment, if the idea of the individual is important to you, then critical race theory is not a tool that you want to use. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, critical race theory is not a tool in that sense. When it is applied, or how it's being applied anyway, is more in line with what some people call critical social justice,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is, the problem. Critical social justice, the tenets of critical social justice do not promote what you just talked about, right?
No.
Societal human well-being. It doesn't do that at all. What it does is separate, and as we talked about earlier, separation builds mistrust, right? It
Yep.
builds an inability to communicate.
Psychologically and naturally, like as a human being, A, when this happens, B, this happens, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's all.
So these we are offering an alternative, a way out. We're prepared to talk with community. We're ready to go forth with our ideas. It's not like we are shouting into the wind all of these other things. So if people see this, I do hope that we are ready to work side by side with them, because the ideology is everywhere. No matter what institution you're in, it's everywhere, and the individuals within those institutions right now, they can say, you know what, we want to walk away from this. We recognize that it is rooted in philosophical practices that are damaging to the human spirit. We
Right.
see that. What else is there?
Right.
And we hope to, not just us, but we hope to ignite something much larger, because the world needs, we need a lot of momentum on this unique idea that we somehow have.
Right. And I mean, I'll just say this, and then that'll be it. 2020 was a rough year, right? Especially when it comes to race relations, as well as a global pandemic, and
Being a
very
human.
a very flawed transfer of power, at the federal level. All
And within the
I guess that's
international order.
2021 still.
Yeah.
The seeds of that were planted long before January 6th of 2021. Last year was, to me, an opportunity, a wide open door for all of us to walk through, that involved racial understanding and coming to terms with the racism that is still alive and well in this country. I think we blew it.
Mm.
Because I wrote an article about this in Newsweek in 2020. Instead of embracing this desire, right, societal desire to have these conversations, a lot of people took it as an opportunity to yell at white people.
Mm.
right? And that's it. Even the ones who like were like, what can I do to help? What can I do to
Right.
help?
Right.
Go read 47 books and then talk to me. No, this window of opportunity is here. We've been waiting for it for quite some time. It's unfortunate how it came about,
Yep.
but it's here.
Yep.
And if people want to talk, let's talk,
Yep.
right? Don't tell them to go do homework that they don't have time for, that you had time for because you were in graduate school doing it,
Yep.
you know? So I want to remedy that dropped opportunity. And, I want to make sure that things like empowered pathways can be known, right? In not just education, but, corporate America as well.
You, that it brings up a good point because there truly are, racism. There's historical injustices. There's current injustices. There's going to be future injustices because there's this notion that if you don't go along with the ideology, then you are refusing to acknowledge what is taking place and what is currently taking place. Uh, so you just made me realize, that there are, and that the current way of trying to solve those problems is only exacerbating them. It's only strengthening our capacities for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. It's as human beings, it's building those psychological capacities to continue the harm. I want to go back to where you said, I think we blew it. The picture that I have is we're on a bicycle. There's a fork in the road, and right before the big fork, there's a big rock, and we hit that rock.
Yeah.
Maybe we fell off the bike. We skinned up our knees really, really bad. Things aren't good. It's that that 7-year-old bike crash that you had when you thought you had some confidence, but you just totally ate it. That's what we just did. So
Okay.
now there's still a fork in the road, and we're wounded, we're exhausted, but we're standing up with the bike at our side, ready to get on it.
Yes. I like that.
Every organization, every institution, every one of us as individuals is wounded, exhausted, and at a pivotal fork in the road. One, it's going to lead to a constant state of destruction. Even after you die and pass on, this path is destructive.
Hmm.
And then the other one is, how can we work together and really address the things that we need to address for the sake and the well-being of us, this generation, and the future generations?
Okay. I like that.
That's a pretty
But
good reframe, right?
yeah, so what does the rock represent?
The rock represents, and what if the rock, this conversation right here, what if we just rocked people's world, right? No. I think that rock represents any moment that maybe it's that rock in our stomach of, hey, something's not quite right.
Okay.
Something's not right. It's any time that you've been encountered with, hey, this doesn't feel right. That's what that rock is.
Okay.
Or
All
just this massive awareness of like, man, we've really got to get our stuff. We got to get our stuff together, man.
right. Okay.
What
So
would
it
you
was
say it represents?
well, I was, when you gave that analogy, I was thinking, that rock in the road, perhaps it isn't necessary because I mean, there's this meme of somebody sticking a stick in his own spoke,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then, I mean, it could be construed that way, that we kind of fell off this bike, on our own, and that
Right.
we need to get up and get rid of that stick, right, and choose the right path.
Right. Now,
Uh,
if it's the stick, it's the ideology, you
Yeah.
know. If like the intention, like, the start of that meme, I'm trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
But there's this, the ideology is the stick, and then
Yeah.
when you're laying down on the ground, oh, white people,
Yeah.
like, no, it's this thing right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's essentially what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, cool, man. We'll end this and then just
Yeah. I
hang
got
out for
office hours.
let me stop this and we'll hang out for a second.
All right.
Bye.